The man across the table looked at the ribbons on my chest the way a customs officer looks at a passport he has already decided is fake. "A woman wearing those ribbons," Captain Dane Ferris said, loud enough to turn the heads at the next table. "Stolen valor, you know that's a crime, right?" He smiled like he had caught me at something. "Go on. Prove 1 day of real service. Just one. You can't." I had been called a great many things in 14 years of being no one in particular. Slow when I was tired. Difficult when I held a boundary. Lucky by people who did not know what the luck had cost. I had never, in all that time, been called a fraud by a man wearing the eagle, globe, and anchor I had bled for in a country most of the people in that hall could not have found on a map. I set down my fork. I did not set it down hard. I have never in my life had the luxury of throwing things. Around us, the regimental dinner went on the way these things do. 200 Marines and their guests at long tables under a ceiling strung with the colors of every battalion the regiment had ever fielded. Glasses, low laughter, the particular warmth of a room full of people who believe they have earned the right to be in it. At the head of the room sat the guest of honor and the colors and the empty table set for the fallen. The single place no one fills. The overturned glass, the white cloth, the candle. I had been staring at that empty table since I sat down. I had been trying very hard not to think about whose names belonged there. "I'm not selling anything, Captain," I said. "I'm just having dinner." "Sure you are." He leaned back and looked at me for the benefit of his audience. 2 younger officers who were not quite laughing yet, but were ready to. "Let me guess. Your boyfriend's a Marine and you borrowed his ribbon rack from a costume shop. Or you're one of those people who buys a uniform and stands at the airport for free drinks." Beside me, my friend Paige started to rise out of her chair. I put my hand on her forearm. Not hard, just enough. Master Sergeant Paige Atwell would have set the room on fire for me. She had wanted to set rooms on fire for me for the better part of 16 years, and on more than one night in another country, she had come very close to doing it literally. She looked at my hand on her arm, and she looked at my face, and she sat back down, vibrating. I had learned a long time ago that the loudest thing in any room is not the man shouting. It is the person who refuses to perform. I had built an entire quiet life on that principle. I was about to find out whether I still believed it. 3 seats down on my side of the table, a young first lieutenant I did not know leaned forward. Her name tape, when I finally read it later, said Calderon. "Sir," she said carefully, "maybe we ease off. We don't actually know." "I know exactly what I'm looking at, Lieutenant," Ferris said without taking his eyes off me. "Sit down." She sat. She did not want to. I gave her the smallest nod I could manage, the one that says it is all right. This is not your fight. I have been in worse rooms than this one. She did not believe me. Good. She was paying attention. I reached for the cuff of my right sleeve. "I want to tell you that I knew what would happen next. I did not. I had spent 14 years making absolutely certain that nothing like this would ever happen, that no one in any room would ever again look at me and connect me to the thing I had survived. I had been so good at it. And here I was, at a dinner I had not wanted to attend, reaching for the one piece of proof I had never been able to throw away because it was inked into my own skin. So I gave the captain the only evidence I had left. I rolled up my sleeve. I had not worn the medals in 14 years. I want you to understand how strange it was just to be in that room before any of the rest of it happened. I had not been to a Marine Corps event of any kind since the spring of 2012. I had not stood for the colors. I had not heard the hymn played live. I had organized an entire adult life around the careful avoidance of rooms exactly like that one. And I had been good at it, the way you can be good at holding your breath if you practice every day for 14 years. The night before the dinner, I sat at my kitchen table and mounted my ribbons onto the rack with hands that still knew exactly how to do it. That frightened me more than anything. The muscle memory. The way my thumb found the back of the bronze star and seated the pin without my looking. The way you remember a phone number from a house you have not lived in since you were a child. I sat there at 11 o'clock at night under a kitchen light, A 43-year-old woman in a bathrobe, mounting a Combat Valor Award onto a dress I had bought for the occasion, and I almost called Paige to tell her I could not do it. I had stayed in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I went in. Paige had to come out and get me. She knocked on the window of my car with one knuckle, and when I rolled it down, she did not say anything dramatic. She just leaned on the door. "You earned your seat at that table more than any man in that room," she said. "So get out of the car and go sit in it." I shouldn't have let you talk me into this. Probably not. She opened my door. "Come on, 1 hour. You owe me that much for 14 years of unanswered phone calls." That was fair, so I went in. Paige and I had gone through the female engagement team workup together in 2010. She had been on a different patrol base during the deployment, 20 miles and a world away, and she had been the first person to find me afterward. The first person from the old life to track down the woman everyone thought was dead. She had not let go since. For 14 years, she had called me on the anniversary, and on the Marine Corps birthday, and on my actual birthday, and most of the time I had let it go to voicemail, and she had left messages anyway. Never angry, just present. A voice on the line every few weeks, reminding me that one person from the before knew I was alive and was not going to pretend otherwise. She was the reason I was at the dinner. She was the reason for a great many things. There should be a medal for the people who refuse to let you disappear. There is not. So I am telling you about her instead. You should know who I was by then, because it matters to what came after. I was nobody. I mean that as a description, not as self-pity. After I left the Corps, I took a job at a logistics company, 2 states from anyone who had known me, moving other people's freight from one coast to the other, and I was good at it precisely because it asked me nothing about my past. I had a small apartment with very little in it. I had a window box of herbs I sometimes remembered to water. I had a dog for a while, an old shepherd named Roy, and when he died, I did not get another one because I had become a person who did not want to be responsible for one more living thing leaving. I moved every few years, never far, just enough. I never put down the kind of roots that would require explaining myself. I dated a little here and there, kind men mostly. And it never lasted, because there is a point in any real closeness where the other person wants to know the shape of you, the whole shape, the parts under the sleeve. And I could not give them that. I would feel them getting close to the question, and I would go cold and quiet, and eventually they would stop asking, and then they would stop calling, and I would tell myself it was for the best. I was very good at telling myself things were for the best. It is a skill, like any other. You can get good at almost anything if you practice it every day for 14 years. I did not have photographs up. I did not tell new acquaintances I had been in the Marines. When someone at work found out, by accident, the way these things come out, and said the inevitable thing, the thank you for your service, I said the thing you say back and changed the subject so fast it gave them whiplash. I was not ashamed of having served. I want to be very clear about that. I was ashamed of having lived. That is a hard thing to explain to people who have not carried it. So let me tell you how it happened. In the autumn of 2010, I was 27 years old and a sergeant, and I was sent to Helmand province as part of a female engagement team attached to 3rd Battalion. You may not know what a female engagement team was. Most people do not. In that war, in that place, there were doors that male Marines could not walk through. There were women on the other side of those doors who knew things, who needed things, who would never in 1,000 years speak to a man with a rifle. So the Corps took women like me, trained us, and attached us to infantry units, and sent us through those doors. We were Marines. We carried what they carried and walked where they walked, and stood the same lines they stood. And we were, in the eyes of a certain kind of Marine, not quite real. Guests, attachments, the coffee girls who had wandered too far forward. The training had been hard in a way I had not expected. They did not go easy on us because we were women. If anything, they pushed harder, because everyone knew we would be tested in the field by men who assumed we did not belong. And the only argument that ever worked against that assumption was competence demonstrated over and over until it could not be denied. I learned to shoot better than most of the infantrymen I would later be attached to. I learned to carry a full combat load on a body the manuals were not written for. I learned the language well enough to sit on a dirt floor with a woman 3 times my age and drink tea and listen. Really listen. For an hour. For the one sentence that mattered. The sentence that might keep a patrol from walking into something. That was the actual job. Not the patches, not the cadences. Sitting on dirt floors, earning the trust of people who had every reason to trust no one, and carrying what they told me back to men who would have died without it. There was a morning, early in the deployment, when a woman in a compound I had visited 3 times pressed a folded scrap of cloth into my hand as I left, and would not look at me, and I understood without a word that there was something in the field the patrol was about to cross that should not be crossed. I told the patrol leader, he was a staff sergeant, who had made it very clear he thought the female engagement team was a public relations stunt that was going to get someone killed. He looked at me for a long 3 seconds, and then he changed the route. 2 days later, they found what had been waiting in that field. After that, the staff sergeant saved me a seat at the briefings. He never said he was sorry for what he had thought. He did not have to. Marines apologize with seats at tables. I have learned that lesson more than once in my life, and I learned it first from a man who never said a word. The Marines of 3rd Battalion called themselves the Sons of the 3rd. It was on their patches and in their cadences, and tattooed on half their forearms, the eagle, globe, and anchor with the battalion's own device, worked into it, and the year the battalion was raised. Sons of the 3rd. I was, very obviously, not a son of anything. The first day I arrived at the patrol base, a lance corporal, who could not have been more than 19, looked at me getting off the bird and asked me, in complete sincerity, if I was the new coffee girl. His name was Toby Hartwell. I am going to tell you about Toby Hartwell, because if I am finally going to stop being quiet, I am going to be loud about the right things. He was 19. He was from a small town in the middle of the country, the kind of place with 1 stoplight and a water tower with the high school mascot painted on it. He had a gap in his front teeth and a laugh you could hear across the whole base, and a mother he wrote to twice a week in actual handwriting, which even then was a rare and old-fashioned thing. He asked me on the first day if I was the coffee girl, and by the 3rd week he was saving me a seat at chow and calling me sergeant, like he meant it, because he had watched me do my job and decided, with the absolute moral clarity of a 19-year-old, that I was all right. When we rotate home, Sergeant, he told me once, the 2 of us sitting against a wall in the last light of an ordinary evening. You're meeting my mom. I already told her about you. She'll feed you till you can't stand up. That's her whole thing. You'll see. I'll hold you to that, Hartwell, I said. I want you to hold on to that, the way I have held on to it for 16 years. A 19-year-old boy in a war, planning to bring his sergeant home to meet his mother, certain that we would all rotate out together and eat his mother's cooking and be fine. The last week, the base had the strange lightness of men who can see the end. People talked about what they would eat first when they got home. Hartwell was going to have his mother's pot roast, and then, he said, he was going to sleep for a week, and then he was going to take the truck he had been saving for and drive it nowhere in particular with the windows down. Boone was going to see the ocean. Ward, who was already a father, was going to meet his daughter, who had been born while he was deployed and whom he had only seen in photographs. Everyone had a list. I had a list too. It was short. I was going to call my own mother, and then I was going to go meet Hartwell's, because he had asked me and I had said yes, and a promise to a 19-year-old is still a promise. We were 9 days from going home. The captain looked at the tattoo on my forearm and laughed. It is worth describing what he saw, because it is the whole hinge of the night. On the inside of my right forearm, where I could see it every day and no one else had to, was the Sons of the 3rd insignia. The eagle, the globe, the anchor, the battalion's device, worked into the design, and underneath it, a date. I had it done in the spring of 2012, the week before I retired. In a small shop near the hospital, where I had spent the better part of a year learning to walk and breathe and sleep again. It was the only memorial I let myself have. It was on my own skin, where I did not have to explain it to anyone, where I could keep my dead close without ever having to stand in front of a wall with their names on it and be looked at. A tattoo, Varys said, delighted. That's your proof? You know you can buy a tattoo at any strip mall in America. My kid sister has a tattoo. That doesn't make her a Marine. I started to roll my sleeve back down, and 2 seats away from the captain at the head of the table, the guest of honor set down his glass. I had not paid much attention to him when I came in. I had been so focused on not being seen that I had not done the thing I would once have done automatically, which is to read the room to know exactly who held the rank and where the exits were. The program on the table said the guest of honor was a retired lieutenant general, 3 stars, a name I had not let myself read closely because I did not want to know if I knew it. I knew it. Lieutenant General Emmett Hargrove was a big man gone gray and a little stooped, the way the strongest men often go in their 50s, like something heavy had been set on their shoulders so long ago that they had stopped noticing they were carrying it. In the autumn of 2010, he had not been a general. He had been a lieutenant colonel, and he had commanded 3rd Battalion, and he had been the man whose voice came over the net on the worst morning of my life, telling everyone to hold, that help was coming, that no one was being left. He stood up. He did not stand up quickly. He stood the way an older man stands, with a hand on the table. But once he was up, he came around the head of the table toward me, and the people in his path moved without quite knowing why they were moving, and he stopped in front of me and looked down at my forearm, at the ink, the way a man reads a name carved in stone. "Sons of the 3rd, he said. His voice was very quiet. The captain's grin was still on his face, caught there, going stale. I commanded them. He raised his eyes to mine. I watched something move behind them, some terrible arithmetic, a man counting. "Who are you?" I had 100 ways to answer that. I had spent 14 years building walls out of all the ways to answer that. And every one of them fell down at once, because there was only one true thing to say to the man who had read my name to my own funeral. "The soldier you buried," I said. For the first time in 14 years, somebody in a uniform looked at me and went pale. The captain, to his enormous discredit, kept talking. I have thought a great deal about why people do that. Why a man who has just felt the floor shift under him will double down rather than go quiet. And I think it is the simplest thing in the world. It is fear. Captain Ferris had just realized, somewhere below the level of words, that he had made a mistake of a magnitude he did not yet understand, in front of 200 people and a 3-star general. And the only thing his body knew how to do with that much fear was to keep insisting he was right. "Sir," he said to General Hargrove, and his voice had gone up half a register. "With respect, she's working you. This is a thing people do. There are stories like this all over the internet. The secret veteran nobody recognized. It's practically a genre. She saw your name on the program and..." "Captain?" Hargrove did not raise his voice. I would learn over the following weeks that he almost never did, that he had the particular stillness of a man who had spent his whole career being the calmest person in rooms where everyone else was about to die. "Stop talking. That is not a request." Ferris stopped talking, and in the silence that followed, I felt the old pull. The exit was 20 feet behind me. I knew exactly where it was, because I always know where the exit is. That is one of the things the war gave me that I have never been able to give back. I could stand up. I could say there had been a misunderstanding, that I did not want to make a scene, that I would just go. I had walked out of 14 years of rooms exactly that way, with a polite smile and a fast pulse, and every single time it had felt like the safe thing. And every single time, a little more of me had stayed behind in the doorway. Every cell in my body wanted to disappear. I had made disappearing my entire profession. I had gotten a degree in it. And standing there, with a dead woman's name in the general's mouth and a living woman's pulse in my own throat, I was so tired. I cannot tell you how tired. 14 years of holding my breath, and I was so tired of being careful. The general was looking at me. He was not going to let me leave. Not out of cruelty, out of something closer to terror, the terror of a man who has spent over a decade grieving someone and has just seen her sitting at a dinner table eating a salad. "Don't," he said, very low, just to me. "Whatever you're about to do, the thing where you make yourself small and leave. I have watched a lot of Marines do that. Don't do it tonight." I did not leave. The general turned and looked out over the hall, and he said one name, and the whole room stopped breathing. "Sergeant Major Ward," he said, "front and center." It is a strange thing to be at the exact center of a room's attention after 14 years of arranging your entire existence to be at the edge of every room you enter. I felt it like weather, 200 faces turning, the laughter draining out of the hall table by table, as people realized that whatever was happening at the back was not ordinary, the way a crowd goes quiet when they see 2 cars about to meet at an intersection. From somewhere near the front of the hall, a man stood up. I knew him before he was fully out of his chair. "You do not forget the shape of someone you carried. I had carried Linus Ward 40 meters across open ground in the dark with his blood running down the inside of my sleeve, and I had not seen his face since. And I knew him instantly, the way you know your own name when it is finally called. He was a sergeant major now. He had been a corporal then, 25 years old, a fire team leader on the south side of the perimeter, the side that took the breach. He came down the center of the hall in his dress blues, and I watched his face do the thing that faces do when the brain receives information it has filed permanently under impossible. He was looking for whatever had made the general call him. He scanned the head table. He scanned me and slid past me, and then his eyes came back to me and stopped. And he stopped, dead, in the middle of the floor. "Sergeant Major," General Hargrove said. "Come here. Look at this Marine. Tell me if you have ever seen her before." Ward did not move for a moment. Then he crossed the last of the distance very slowly. The way you approach something you are afraid will turn out to be a trick of the light. He stopped in front of me. He looked at my face. He looked at the tattoo on my forearm, the Sons of the Third ink, and his composure, the composure of a sergeant major, a man whose entire professional existence is built on never letting anyone see him rattled, came apart in front of 200 people. "Sergeant Stafford," he said. I had decided, somewhere in the last 60 seconds, that I was done. Done disappearing. Done being a name on a list. Done agreeing with every room that I was less than I was. If I was going to be seen, I was going to be seen all the way. "Sergeant Wren Stafford," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "Female engagement team attached to 3rd Battalion. Sergeant Major, the last time I saw you, you were bleeding out on the south corner, and I had you by the drag handle, and Doc Boone was screaming at both of us to keep moving." "They told us you died in the breach," Ward said. His voice cracked clean down the middle. He was 41 years old and a sergeant major, and he stood in the middle of the regimental dinner with his eyes filling up. "They told us nobody on the south corner made it but me. I have got your blood. I kept the flak jacket. It is in a box in my garage. I kept it because I could not throw away the last thing that had you on it." The hall was utterly silent now. "I made it," I said. "I'm sorry, Linus. I should have called somebody. I just couldn't." "Let me tell you what happened on the south corner, because Ward had just told a room of 200 people the shape of it, and you deserve the truth of it, and because I have not said it out loud in 16 years, and I am done being quiet. We were 9 days from rotating home. It was the hour before dawn, the hour when the human body wants most to sleep, which is exactly why they came then. It started with a blast on the north wall, a diversion, and then the south wall came apart in a second blast, and they came through the breach. The fire team leadership on the south corner went down in the first 90 seconds. That is not a figure of speech. The corporal in charge of that corner took it almost at once. And the next man, and suddenly the south corner of the patrol base, the corner the enemy was pouring through, had no one running it but a female engagement team sergeant who, according to a certain kind of Marine, was not really there to fight. I want to be honest about that morning. I was not brave. I have read the citation they eventually pinned on me, the bronze star with the little bronze V for valor, and it describes a calm and deliberate Marine making sound tactical decisions under fire, and that Marine is a stranger to me. I do not remember deciding anything. I remember the wall coming apart. I remember Toby Hartwell's voice, very clear, saying my rank, saying, "Sergeant, what do we do?" Because the leadership was down and I was the senior Marine still standing and a 19-year-old was asking me what to do. I remember telling him to get on the gun. I remember the corpsman, Elias Boone, a Navy kid we all called Doc, dragging casualties into the lee of the one wall still standing while I tried to hold the corner. I remember finding Linus Ward, who was a corporal then, half under the rubble of the south wall with his leg open, and I remember getting the drag handle on the back of his vest and hauling him 40 meters across open ground in the dark while Boone laid down everything he had to cover us. I remember going back. A second time. There was a Marine still out there past the breach, and I went back and I got him, and that Marine was, it turned out, already gone. And I carried a dead man 40 meters because I could not tell in the dark, and because I would rather have carried a dead Marine than left a live one, and you do not get to know which it is until you are behind the wall. I remember the weight of Linus Ward, who was not a small man, and the way the drag handle bit into my palm, and the way I counted the meters out loud to myself because counting was the only thing keeping me moving. I remember Doc Boone's voice, very young and very steady, doing the thing the good ones do. narrating his own work to keep himself calm, talking to men who could not hear him anymore as if they could. I remember reloading with hands that did not feel like mine. I remember being cold, which makes no sense, because it was not cold, but I remember being cold. The body does strange accounting in those hours, and it presents you the bill for years afterward. And I remember Toby. The gun position took a direct hit near the end, just before the relief force broke through. I was 20 feet away. The blast put me into the south wall, the wall that was already failing, and the wall came down on top of me, and the last thing I remember of the worst morning of my life is the weight of it, and a Marine's body across my legs, and a great quiet rushing in, and thinking, with a strange and perfect calm, that I had not gotten Toby's mother's address, and now I never would. They found me at first light under the rubble, and a fallen Marine, unconscious, barely breathing, my own blood and 3 other people's blood, all over me, in a heap of the dead on the south corner where everyone knew nobody had survived. So they made the most human mistake there is. In the chaos of a mass casualty morning, with the wall down and the dead being counted and the living being flown out, somebody wrote my name on the wrong list. By the time anyone realized I was breathing, I was on a bird. By the time anyone realized the breathing woman from the south corner was Sergeant Stafford, I was a continent away and in an induced coma, and the battalion was being pulled out, and the machinery of grief had already started to turn. They held the ceremony for the fallen. The chaplain read the names. Lance Corporal Toby Hartwell. And because nobody in that exhausted, gutted, redeploying battalion had connected the unconscious woman in a hospital overseas with the sergeant they had buried in their hearts on the south corner, Sergeant Wren Stafford. The Marine Corps, as an institution, eventually got it right. My service record was corrected. Somewhere in a file, the paperwork says exactly what happened, that I was wounded and not killed, that I recovered and was medically retired in 2012. The institution knew I was alive. But an institution is not a memory. The men I served with redeployed and scattered and got out and got on with their lives, carrying the version they had been handed at dawn on the worst morning of all of our lives, which was that the south corner died, all of it, except for one corporal named Ward who would not stop talking about the sergeant who pulled him out and then went back into the breach and was lost. And a year later, when the battalion dedicated its memorial, a wall of black stone with the names of the fallen from that deployment, somebody carved my name into it. I know this because the general told me that night at the dinner. I read the names at that dedication, Hargrove said. He had pulled a chair around and sat down heavily beside me, and the hall had broken into 100 low conversations, and he spoke as if the 2 of us were the only people in it. I was a lieutenant colonel. It was my battalion. I stood in front of the families, and I read every name on that wall, and I have gone back to that memorial every single year since, on the anniversary, and read them again to myself in the early morning before anyone else is there. I have read your name to your family's empty chairs for 14 years. He looked at me. He was not a man who cried, I could tell, but his eyes were wet and his voice was not entirely under his control. I thought I was honoring a dead Marine, he said. I have been grieving a living one. Sergeant, where in God's name have you been? I did not have a good answer for him. I still do not, entirely. But I am going to try to give you the true one because it is the same answer I gave him, and it is the closest thing to the center of this whole story. I couldn't be the one who lived, I said. He did not say anything for a while. A waiter cleared plates around us, glancing at the general and deciding not to ask whether we needed anything. Out at the front of the hall, the candle on the fallen Marine's table was still burning, the way it burns at every one of these dinners, a small, stubborn flame for the ones who are not coming back. I had spent the whole evening unable to look at it. Now I could not look away. I used to set a place, I said. The first few years, at home, on the anniversary, I would set a place at my table for Hartwell, and I would sit there, and I would not be able to eat. And eventually I stopped doing it because it felt like the kind of thing a crazy person does. But I think I was just trying to seat the dead, because I could not figure out how to seat myself. Hargrove nodded slowly. You seated yourself tonight, he said. I watched you do it. You did not run. No, I said. I didn't. The leadership wanted to destroy Captain Ferris. It happened fast, the way these things do once the room understands what it is looking at. The regimental commander, a colonel I had not met, materialized at my elbow with his face the color of ash, full of apology and fury, and behind him, the command sergeant major, and the energy coming off both of them was unmistakable. They wanted blood, not mine, his. A man had stood up at the regiment's own dinner and called a Bronze Star recipient. A Marine carved into their own memorial, a fraud and a liar, and the institution's immune system had kicked in and wanted to expel him on the spot. "Sergeant Stafford," the colonel said, "I cannot express to you. There are no words. Captain Ferris will be dealt with. Tonight. I promise you that." Ferris was still standing where he had been standing. The two younger officers, who had been ready to laugh with him, had peeled away from him as if he were radioactive. Lieutenant Calderon, the one who had tried to stop him, was standing a little apart with her hand over her mouth. And Ferris himself had gone from red to white, and he had the look I had seen on the faces of 19-year-olds in the worst moments, the look of a person who has just understood that the thing they did cannot be undone. General Hargrove looked at me. "Say the word, Sergeant," he said quietly. "You were wronged in front of the whole regiment. If you want him finished, he is finished tonight. That is within my power to arrange, and it would be just. And I want to tell you that I felt the pull of it. I am not a saint. I had been called a fraud in front of 200 people. I had been called a fraud by a man who had never been within 1,000 miles of the war he was dining out on. And there was a part of me, a real and human part, that wanted to watch him fall. I looked at him. I looked at a frightened man who had been wrong in the worst and most public way. And I thought about how long the whole world had been wrong about me, and how no one had set out to wrong me, how the worst error of my life had been made by exhausted men in the dark trying to count the dead. I thought about how I had let it stand. 14 years, I had let the world be wrong about me, because the truth was unbearable to me, not because anyone was lying. And I thought, I have never once wanted anyone destroyed for being wrong. "No," I said. The colonel blinked. "Sergeant, with respect?" "I don't want him destroyed," I said. "I spent 14 years being a name on a wall because the truth was too heavy for me to pick up. I am not going to end a man's career because the truth was too heavy for him to imagine. That's not the same as letting it go." I stood up. My knee did the thing it does, the thing the south wall left me with. And I let it, and I did not hide it. And I stood up the rest of the way, and I looked at Captain Ferris across the table. "Captain," I said. He flinched at the word, at being addressed by the woman he had called a liar. "You're not finished, but you're going to do something for me." "Anything," he said. It came out cracked. "Sergeant, I am so—" "Don't apologize yet. You haven't earned it yet." I kept my voice level. The whole hall was listening, and I let them. "There is a wall at this regiment with the names of the Marines who died on the deployment I served on. You are going to go to that wall, and you are going to learn every single name on it. Not skim it. Learn it. Who they were, where they were from, how they died. There is a name on that wall that should not be there, and it is mine, and I am going to have it taken down. But the rest of those names should be there forever, and you are going to know them, because you stood up tonight in a room full of their brothers, and you postured about a war that took them while it gave you a desk. When you can tell me about Lance Corporal Toby Hartwell, who was 19, then you can apologize. Not before." Ferris was crying. A grown man, a captain, crying at a dinner table. I did not enjoy it. I want to be honest about that too. There is a version of this story where I enjoyed it, and it is a smaller and meaner story than the one that actually happened, and I will not tell it to you. "Yes, Sergeant," he said. "I will. I promise you I will." "Mercy isn't the same as letting it go," I told him. "I'm giving you the chance to become someone who would never do this again. Don't waste it. That's the whole favor." The colonel beside me did not understand it. I could see that. He was a good officer and a furious one, and in his world the equation was simple. A man had insulted a war hero, and the man should pay. I did not blame him for the math. I had done that math myself for one hot second before I set it down. But I had spent 14 years watching what happens to people who get crushed by a single worst moment, because I had been one, and I did not have it in me to do that to another human being, not even one who had earned it, not even at a dinner held in honor of the dead. Justice and cruelty can look identical from the outside. The difference is on the inside, in what you are actually trying to accomplish. I was not trying to make Captain Ferris suffer. I was trying to make him useful. There is a difference. And it took me half my life to learn it. Later, when the hall had mostly emptied, the general and I sat at the table with 2 cups of coffee gone cold between us, and we talked the way you can only talk to someone who was there. "I have to ask you something," Hargrove said, "and you do not have to answer it. Why did you never tell us you were alive? The institution knew. Your record was right, but you let your own people grieve you for 14 years. You let me read your name to a wall. Why?" I held the cold coffee and looked at the empty table at the front of the hall, the one set for the fallen, the overturned glass, the candle still burning. "Because every time I opened my mouth to say I was alive," I said, "I saw the boys who didn't get to say it. Hartwell was 19. He was going to bring me home to meet his mother. He had a laugh you could hear across the whole base. And he is on that wall, and I am not supposed to be. And for 14 years it felt obscene to me to walk into a room and take a chair at a table that he would never sit at. It felt like stealing. Do you understand? The one time in my life someone really did accuse me of stolen valor, the captain had no idea how close he was. I felt like a thief every single day. Not because I lied about what I did, because I lived and Toby didn't, and I could not figure out how to be the one who lived without it feeling like I had taken something from him." Hargrove was quiet for a long time. "I have buried a lot of Marines," he said finally, "more than I will ever tell my wife. And I want to tell you something I have learned, and you can take it or leave it, because you have earned the right to do either. Surviving is not theft. You did not take Hartwell's life. The men who came through that wall took Hartwell's life. You gave that boy 19 days of being treated like he mattered by a sergeant he respected, and then you put him on a gun, and you held a corner that should have folded, and more Marines went home because of what you did on the corner. Everyone said folded. Ward is alive. Ward has 2 daughters. Those girls exist because a female engagement team sergeant who, let me guess, got asked if she was the coffee girl, would not leave the south corner." I laughed. It came out wet and broke in the middle, but it was a real laugh, the first real one in that room. "Hartwell asked me that," I said. "First day, if I was the coffee girl." "They always do," Hargrove said, "and then they find out." He turned his cup in his hands. "Come see the wall with me, tonight. I want to show you something, and then I want to help you take your name off it, and I want you to let me." I had not been to the memorial. In 14 years of avoiding rooms, I had most carefully avoided that one. But I went with the general that night, the 2 of us walking out into the cold under the lights, and we stood in front of the black stone wall with the names of the fallen carved into it. It is a strange thing to read your own name among the dead. There it was, in the cold, polished stone, the letters cut clean and filled with white. Stafford W. Sargent, among the others. Among Toby Hartwell, LCPL, T. I put my hand against the stone. It was very cold. I found my own name with my fingers, the way you find a step in the dark, and I traced the letters, and for the first time in 14 years, I did not feel like I belonged there. For 14 years, some part of me had agreed with the stone. Some part of me had thought, yes, that is right. I died on the south corner with the rest of them, and the woman walking around in my body is a kind of imposter, a glitch, a name on the wrong list that the universe meant to correct. The captain had called me a fraud, and the deepest, cruelest part of me had thought, he is right, I am a fraud. I have been impersonating a living woman for 14 years. And standing there in the cold with my own name under my fingers, I finally disagreed. "I want it moved," I told Hargrove. "I don't want it erased. I want it moved to wherever you put the ones who came home, because I did come home. It took me 16 years to walk in the door, but I came home." The general put his big hand on my shoulder, the way a father does, the way I imagine Toby Hartwell's father might have, if he had lived to see his son grow up. "We can do that," he said. "We will do that. I'll see to it myself." They moved my name in the spring. It took some doing. There is paperwork for everything, even for resurrecting a Marine the regiment had grieved, and the general spent the better part of 2 months on it. Calling people, signing things, being the kind of immovable object that a 3-star general gets to be when he decides something is going to happen. The regiment keeps 2 records, it turns out. There is the Wall of the Fallen, the Black Stone, and there is a second roll, less famous, that lists the survivors of that deployment, the ones who came home, the ones who were wounded and lived. My name had never been on that one. Now it would be. They held a small ceremony, not a big one. I asked for it to be small, and the general honored that, the way he honored everything I asked for, which I was not used to and which took me a while to accept. The general called me every week or so during those 2 months. He did not make a thing of it. He would call to tell me about some small piece of the paperwork, and then he would stay on the line for 20 minutes talking about nothing in particular. His garden, his grandchildren, a book he was reading, and I understood eventually that the paperwork was the excuse, and the 20 minutes was the point. He had grieved me for 14 years. He was not going to lose track of me again. One evening he said, almost in passing, that he had attended 31 funerals over the course of his career for Marines who had served under him, and that mine was the only one he had ever gotten to take back, and that I had no idea what a gift I had given an old man simply by being alive. I had spent 14 years believing my survival was a burden I was imposing on the memory of the dead. It had not once occurred to me that it might be a gift to the living. It was a clear, cold morning at the memorial, maybe 30 people, and they had a stonemason there, and they took my name off the wall of the fallen, and they added it to the roll of those who came home. The stonemason was an older man, a veteran himself, and he worked slowly and carefully, and when he had finished cutting my name into the survivor's roll, he stepped back and took off his cap, and he did not say anything, and somehow that was the most moving moment of the whole morning. A man I had never met, taking off his hat because a name that had been on the wrong wall for 14 years was finally on the right one. I think about him sometimes. I never got his name. There are so many people in this story whose names I never got, who did some small, enormous thing and then went back to their lives. The world is held together by them. Sergeant Major Ward was there. He brought his 2 daughters, who were 11 and 9, and he introduced them to me, and he said, "Girls, this is the Marine I told you about." And the older one looked up at me with enormous eyes and said, "You're the one who carried Daddy?" And I had to look at the sky for a moment before I could answer her. "I'm the one," I said. "Thank you for carrying my dad," she said with the total seriousness of an 11-year-old. "And I have been thanked for my service many times in my life, by people who did not know what they were thanking me for. And I have never in my life been thanked the way that little girl thanked me." Doc Boone could not be there. He was a paramedic now, in a city far away, with a family and a life, and we had talked on the phone for 3 hours the week after the dinner, the first time in 16 years, and both of us had cried, and neither of us had been embarrassed about it. He sent a letter to be read at the ceremony. It was short. It said, "I always knew you made it. I refused to believe the South Corner died, because I was on the South Corner, and I came home, and so did Ward, and so did the men you went back for. And that math never worked if you were dead. Welcome home, Sergeant. It is about time. Save me a seat at the next one." Doc. Captain Ferris was there too. I had not expected him. But he was there, standing at the back in his service uniform, and when the small ceremony was over, he came up to me, and he did not posture, and he did not perform, and he held out a piece of paper. "You told me not to apologize until I could tell you about Lance Corporal Hartwell," he said. His voice was steady this time. "I learned all of them, every name on the wall. It took me 2 months, but you asked about Hartwell, so..." He looked down at the paper, and then he looked back up at me, and he did not read from it. He just said it. "Toby Hartwell, 19, from a town in the middle of the country with 1 stoplight. He wrote his mother twice a week by hand. He had a gap in his teeth and a laugh people remembered. He was on the gun on the South Corner when it took a direct hit. 9 days before he was supposed to go home, and he never met the grandchildren his mother is never going to have." His jaw worked. "I have spent my career being proud of a uniform I never made bleed. You held a corner that folded, and you went back into a breach twice. I called you a fraud. I will carry that for the rest of my life, and I should. I am sorry, Sergeant Stafford, not for getting caught, for who I was." I looked at him for a long moment. "That's a real apology," I said. "Thank you. I accept it." I let that sit. "Morse, now go be a better officer than the man who made it. That's how you actually pay it back. Not to me, to the lieutenants watching you." He nodded. He had stopped being my enemy somewhere in the last 2 months, and he had become something more useful, which was a man who had been changed by being wrong. The world does not have nearly enough of those. There was one more thing I had to do, and it was the thing I had been most afraid of. More afraid of than the dinner. More afraid of than the wall. I had to go see Toby Hartwell's mother. She lived where Toby had said she lived, in the small town with the one stoplight and the water tower with the high school mascot painted on it. I had her address from the regiment. I had had it, in some form, for 16 years, in the sense that I could have found it, and I had not let myself find it, because going to her was the most impossible thing I could imagine. What do you say to the mother of the boy who planned to bring you home to meet her, when you came home and he did not? I drove the whole way with my hands tight on the wheel. I almost turned around twice. She was in her 60s now, a small woman with Toby's same gap-toothed smile, which undid me the moment she opened the door. And she looked at me standing on her porch in the cold, and she said, "You're her, aren't you? You're the sergeant. He wrote me about you." I had a whole speech. I lost all of it. "He was going to bring me home to meet you," I said. "He said you'd feed me till I couldn't stand up. I'm so sorry it took me 16 years to come." And Toby Hartwell's mother, who had every right to be angry at the woman who lived when her son did not, looked at me on her porch and did the thing her son said she would do. She pulled me inside out of the cold, and she put me at her kitchen table, and she started cooking. We sat for 6 hours. I told her everything. I told her about the first day, the coffee girl, the gap in his teeth, the saved chow seat, the way he called me sergeant, like he meant it. I told her about the last evening, the two of us against the wall in the last light, Toby planning a future that assumed all of us in it. And then I told her about the morning. All of it, the parts I had never told anyone. The breach and the gun, and the direct hit, and the fact that her son's last act on this earth was to ask his sergeant what to do, and then to do it. To get on the gun and hold a corner so that other people's sons could go home. I told her that more Marines were alive because of what her boy did in the last 90 seconds of his life. I told her that Linus Ward had 2 daughters, and that those girls existed in part because Toby Hartwell got on the gun. She cried. I cried. We ate her cooking, which was as good as he promised, and we cried and we laughed, and she showed me the letters, the actual handwritten letters, 2 a week, and there I was in them, the new sergeant, the fat sergeant. "She's tough, but she's fair, Mom. She treats me like I matter." "He was right about you," she said. "He was a good judge. He got that from his father." She put her hand over mine on the table. "You did not take my son from me. The war took my son. You gave me 16 years of being right about who he was, because every time I doubted whether he'd been treated well over there, I had your name in his letters to prove it. You were his proof all this time, and you never knew it." Before I left, she went into the other room and came back with something in her hand. It was a small framed photograph of Toby in his dress blues, the official one, 19 years old, and trying so hard to look serious that the corner of his mouth had betrayed him into the beginning of that laugh. She pressed it into my hands the way the woman in the compound had pressed the scrap of cloth into mine all those years ago, and she closed my fingers over it. "He would want you to have one," she said. "So you stop carrying only the bad morning. Carry this too." I have it on my wall now. It is the first photograph I have put up in 14 years. It is the first thing I see when I wake up, a 19-year-old boy losing the fight against his own smile. And it has taught me more about how to be alive than anything else I own. I had spent 14 years believing I was a thief, and a woman whose son I could not save sat me at her table and told me I had been the proof of his life. She fed me until I could not stand up. I let her. I had been hungry for a very long time and not for food. I want to talk to you now, whoever you are, sitting wherever you are sitting, listening to a stranger tell you about the worst and best night of her life. Maybe someone has decided you are nothing. Maybe they have decided it loudly in front of other people, the way the captain decided it about me. Or maybe they decided it quietly, a long time ago, and you have spent years agreeing with them, the way I agreed with a wall of stone that had my name in the wrong place. Maybe you survived something, and the surviving felt like a debt, and you have been paying it ever since by making yourself small, by staying at the edge of every room, by never taking the chair. I want to tell you the one thing I learned, the thing that cost me 16 years to learn, and that I am giving to you for free. You do not have to argue with the people who have decided you are nothing. Arguing is exhausting and it never works because their decision was never about you. You only have to stop agreeing with them. That is the whole thing. Stop agreeing. I know how simple that sounds. I know that simple and easy are not the same word. It took me 16 years, and a captain calling me a fraud, and a general saying my own name back to me before I could do it, and I had every advantage, a friend who would not quit on me, a unit that wanted me back, a general who decided that I mattered. Maybe you do not have those things. Maybe you are doing this alone. So let me be the voice on the line for you, the way Paige was for me. You are not a name on the wrong list. You did not steal the life you are living. Whatever you survived, you were allowed to survive it. No one handed you a debt. You picked it up because you are the kind of person who picks things up. And you are allowed to set this one down. Roll up your sleeve. Let them see what you carried. Whatever it is, the thing inked into you that no one else can see. You do not owe the world your invisibility just because living felt like something you had to apologize for. You came home. However long it took you to walk in the door, you came home. And there's a chair at the table. And it was always yours. I go to the memorial every year now, on the anniversary, in the early morning before anyone else is there, the way the general did for 14 years. I stand in front of the black stone, and I read the names of the fallen, Toby Hartwell and all the rest, and I say them out loud, because they earned that. And then I walk to the other wall, the one for the ones who came home, and I find my own name there, among the living, where the general put it. And I stop apologizing for being alive. That is the last salute I can give them. Not my grief, my life. Lived all the way out loud in a chair I finally stopped refusing to sit in. Welcome home, Sergeant, Doc wrote me. It is about time. It was, it is, and it is not too late for you either. Roll up your sleeve, take the chair. It was always yours.